Hi, and welcome to the Full Bloom Project, a body-positive parenting podcast dedicated to promoting emotional wellness in our children and health at every size for the whole family.
Each week, we speak with extraordinary experts and distill everything from scholarly research to self-help books into accessible and digestible daily parenting practices. We're your hosts, Leslie Block
and Zoe Bisbing, both New York City-based adolescent eating disorder psychotherapists and mothers of two, here to help you help your children fully bloom.
This episode is brought to you by the ABCs of Body Positive Parenting. Our signature virtual guides provide additional research and resources to help you put body positive parenting into action, so you and your care providers can help your children fully bloom. To claim yours, please visit our website at fullbloomproject.com. Today, we're diving deep into the definition of the thin ideal and sharing with you a well-researched prevention program called The Body Project with Dr. Eric Stice, one of the creators of this program. The dissonance-based body acceptance program helps people of all ages resist cultural pressures to conform to thin appearance ideals. The Body Project is supported by more research than any other body image program and has been found to reduce the onset of eating disorders.
All body-positive parents, especially those of older kids, tweens, and teens, need to know about this program. And there is no one better to talk to us about it than Eric Stice himself. As a senior research scientist at Oregon Research Institute, his research focuses on identifying risk factors that predict onset of eating disorders, and we're thrilled to have him here. Welcome, Eric, to the Full Bloom Project.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So we want to just start by getting to know you a little bit and having our listeners understand who you are and how you came to pioneer this body acceptance program.
Yeah, well, we're interested in graduate school, my wife and I, in examples of psychiatric problems that are influenced by culture. She's a sociologist and I'm a clinical psychologist, so we're really interested in culture-bound syndromes, and eating disorders seem to represent the perfect example of that, in the sense that there was a lot of belief at that time that pursuit of the thin beauty ideal was an important generative factor for causing eating disorders. So we decided to kind of really dive deep into it. And at that point in time, there was actually very little research on the risk factors for eating disorders and very few effective prevention programs. In fact, none at that time.
So how did you guys start?
Yeah, we were really interested. At that point in time, it was just everybody saying, oh, wow, the supermodels are getting thinner, Playboy centerfolds are getting thinner, Miss America contestants are getting thinner. Maybe that's linked to eating disorders, but nobody had actually measured pursuit of the thin ideal or correlated it with eating disorder symptoms and body image concerns. So we started a program of research, and actually the very first step we had to do was create a whole bunch of focus groups with adolescent boys and girls and have them say what the appearance ideal is for both males and females, and create a scale to measure pursuit of the thin ideal or internalization of the thin beauty ideal.
So that's actually a great moment, I think, to ask this defining question, right? What exactly is the thin ideal? Because I know we've talked a lot about it week after week here, but this might just be a nice time to explicitly define the thin ideal and why it's so toxic.
Yeah, so, it was an emergent idea. Nobody had created a scale to measure that. So we decided that we'd really kind of have a whole bunch of young adolescents kind of tell us what they were pressured in terms of appearance ideal for both the genders. And, for women, the beauty ideal right now centers around thinness, as well as muscularity and fitness, and perfect or flawless complexion. So freckles aren't horribly popular, and other things that cause, rosacea or something like that affect kind of how somebody appears. So it's really, what was represented in fashion and beauty magazines back in the 90s, which now has found a home on social media. But it's, it's a relatively complex and narrow beauty ideal. There's not a whole wide range of beauty according to it. It's really just very narrowly defined. For men, it also involves more muscularity, and, that's equally narrow in terms of an appearance ideal that we define as a culture.
And what have you found, like, what made you narrow in on this specifically and realize this was such a huge risk factor, or the most important risk factor in your research?
Well, what we originally did, and it was kind of a fun sort of thing intellectually, but I read all the published papers. One of my professors at Arizona State University, Charlene Woolcheck, gave me her file of all the papers on eating disorders. And I read them all and basically came up with a working etiologic model of how the worst risk factors work in combination to give rise to eating disorders. And the initial model proposed that pressure for thinness by our culture, so from parents, peers, dating partners, whatnot, gives rise to kind of pursuit of the thin beauty ideal, and that pressure for thinness and then internalized pursuit of the thin beauty ideal cause body dissatisfaction. Now, this body dissatisfaction as a next step increases risk for dietary restriction, which increases the odds of binge eating because the hungrier you are, the higher the reward value of food, particularly high-calorie foods. But body dissatisfaction also contributes to negative mood, and negative mood likewise increases risk for onset of binge eating and unhealthy weight control behaviors. So this is a dual pathway model. And we conducted a whole bunch of prospective studies, confirmed that each of those variables did predict future onset or escalation of eating disorder symptoms, and we subsequently confirmed that it predicts future onset of eating disorders. And I might add that that same model, according to some research out of Italy, works exactly the same way for men. I wouldn't have put money on that, but the same 5 variables in the dual pathway model predict onset of eating disorders among males, at least in Italy.
That's interesting.
So that, go ahead.
I was just saying, that's interesting. I was curious if that's a recent finding.
Yeah, it just came out, I think 2017 was when it was published, but it's a great Italian researcher who's been really kind of looking at the dual pathway model, translating it into Italian culture. And he really argues that the culture in Italy is even more toxic in terms of promoting the appearance ideal than it is in the United States. I'm not really sure how you determine that, but it's interesting that way. But yeah, that's research that's just come out recently, and it's confirmed it, that these 5 risk factors are kind of the core risk factors for onset of eating disorders. And what we did, I'm sort of a experimental scientist geek, and I decided that it would be useful. Just because you find something predicts future onset of a pathological condition doesn't mean it's a causal relationship. It just could be along for the ride or something else. But we went through and developed interventions that manipulated each of the risk factors. So we created an intervention for body dissatisfaction, one for pursuit of the thin beauty ideal, another for reducing negative mood, and basically found out that the Body Project, which is really focused solely on allowing young women to talk themselves out of pursuing an unrealistic beauty ideal, had the greatest acceptability when it came to the participants in the groups, and also seemed to produce the strongest effects.
And can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like, what about the Body Project itself? What is it? How does it work? How have you found that it can reduce the onset of eating disorders?
Yeah, let me define the concept of cognitive dissonance and then get into the evidence base. But as a clinician at Stanford, I saw a patient with anorexia nervosa, and I was, relatively early on in my treatment career. And after 5 sessions of trying to argue her out of having anorexia nervosa, I walked into the 6th session and I said, today we're going to try something different. And I'm going to ask you to argue me out of pursuing the thin beauty ideal and having anorexia nervosa. So what I did is I asked her to essentially argue against herself for the whole hour, and it just really struck me as a very therapeutic moment that she was really struggling to argue against what she had said to me, because I would parrot back what she had said to justify anorexia nervosa in her life. And it just seemed really useful. So we decided to create an eating disorder prevention program where we basically gave young women a chance to argue against pursuing the thin beauty ideal. And this is where we decided to kind of use cognitive dissonance as a framework, but there's a very big literature in social psychology on persuasion principles. And one of those literatures focuses on cognitive dissonance. And in a nutshell, human beings have a very strong fundamental desire to maintain consistency between what they say and what they think. So what we do in the Body Project is we have a series of verbal, written, and behavioral exercises in which young women explore the negative effects of pursuing the thin ideal. And in so doing, they reduce their pursuit of it because they essentially argue against trying to achieve the supermodel look through severe dietary restriction, and they talk themselves out of it. So they reduce their pursuit of thin beauty ideal. So the Body Project is very singular in focus. It's not like we went through and said, let's try to hit each of the risk factors in the dual pathway model of eating disorders, but rather let's just manipulate one at a time so we can figure out which is causally related. And I should say that this is very important because there's a great deal of literature that has suggested that dietary restriction is a risk factor for eating disorders. And we've been unable to find any experimental support for that. It's a much more complex literature than we probably want to get into, but none of the measures that we use to measure dietary restriction identify people who are dieting. So dietary restriction measures seem to identify people who are pursuing the thin beauty ideal and are unhappy about the fact that they haven't achieved it. Mm. But I will say that the more hours that you go without caloric intake, the more your reward circuitry activates when you look at pictures of foods, taste pictures of foods, and anticipate tasting pictures of foods. So true caloric restriction, which is very rare in the real world, does increase the reward value of food and probably increases your odds of binge eating, even though we don't know how to measure dietary restriction very well.
So what have you found, just coming back to the thin ideal, because it sounds like you kind of identified that risk factor and explored ways to manipulate it or target it and found that they were effective. And it came in the form of the dissonance model. Is that correct? That methodology created a reduction in the pursuit of the thin ideal?
Within the context of eating disorders, we just basically have the participants go through and discuss only the costs of pursuing the thin beauty ideal, never the benefits. And we've done, at this point in time, there's been 55 trials have been conducted with evaluating the Body Project or kind of derivatives thereof. And there's a really crystal clear evidence that if you randomly assign people to the Body Project, let young women talk themselves out of pursuing the thin beauty ideal, it reduces pursuit of the thin ideal like it should. It actually even reduces reward circuitry response to supermodels. So this is one of my favorite studies is we randomly assign people to complete the Body Project or just an educational brochure control condition, show them pictures of supermodels and average weight women before and after. And what we found is that at baseline, when people looked at supermodels, very thin models, it activated the caudate and other reward and attention circuitry very strongly. But after they went through the Body Project, that effect went away and they actually showed greater reward reaching response to average weight people, like real bodies, as opposed to the thin ideal.
That's so remarkable and just it's super exciting for me as a clinician, but also as a parent, of young girls. Even though it sounds like it, in your research or with the Italian study, it's beyond girls potentially, that the impact of doing, at least at this point in time, the Body Project has on our girls and potentially boys. Has the Body Project been studied with boys and men?
Yes. Tiffany Brown has conducted trials evaluating the Body Project adapted for men and found it to be very effective for heterosexual men, homosexual men, and there's a researcher down in Mexico who's been running co-ed groups, and she gets really beautiful effects. So the Body Project works for both genders. We focused on women because they have higher risk for eating disorders, but it seems to work very well for both men and women. I should say that I think one of the reasons why the Body Project works so well is because it targets a very early risk factor. So reducing pursuit of the thin beauty ideal seems to also decrease body dissatisfaction, reduce negative affect, reduce unhealthy weight control behaviors, and reduce eating disorder symptoms and future onset. And I think if you just went after negative affect, for example, which you've done in a couple trials, you don't get the wholesale effect on that whole cascade of risk factors. So I think we just lucked out in that we decided to focus on the headwaters of a risk cascade that is beneficial by going early. And quite frankly, new findings that just came out 2017 suggest that psychosocial impairment, so not getting along with your family, your peers, your schoolmates, is actually the best risk factor for predicting onset of eating disorders, beating out even pursuit of the thin beauty ideal. And what we are learning is basically, for a lot of adolescents, they really struggle to fit in and feel loved and accepted, and they turn to pursuing the culturally sanctioned beauty ideal to gain that social acceptance.
Yeah.
So we're believing now that we could actually go one step further back and promote psychosocial functioning, helping people get along well with people, have positive, rewarding relationships with them. And that might work even better than the Body Project, but that's going to take us probably 10 years to sort that out.
Well, we'll stay tuned for sure. But as parents and for the parents listening, I'm wondering what, if any, what your thoughts are on the interventions of the Body Project being adapted to a parenting practice. If so, how? Or if not, what should a parent listening to this podcast take away?
Well, I think the combination of research on the etiology of eating disorders conducted in the broader field would suggest that sending your kid a message that they're valued and loved the way they are and that they don't have to conform to a particular parent's ideal to be appreciated is a really critical message as parents. And I'm a parent as well, and I think it's essential for both boys and girls and the folks who fall in between. But the interesting thing about the Body Project is it's a series of activities. A lot of those activities are simple Socratic questions that you ask your kid. What is the thin beauty ideal? What is it defining? How do you define it? And then how do you can ask these Socratic questions about what are the costs of pursuing the thin beauty ideal, and actually do these same exercises with your kid, and it would probably be very therapeutic. What doesn't work is if you lecture your kid and tell them what you think about this. Kids are very particular. They'd rather discover things themselves rather than have old people tell them how to live their lives. So there's a whole bunch of eating disorder prevention programs that has provided the content that pursuing the thin beauty ideal is harming, but they don't get a change in how much the kids actually pursue the thin beauty ideal. So I think that's the really important part is with cognitive dissonance, we've discovered a way to get people to reduce an attitudinal risk factor that we weren't able to reduce by just education. So for instance, in one of our trials, the control group was doing covering the same material that's in the Body Project, but the facilitator just reads it to the patient, to the participants. So receiving the information is not the same as discussing the information, having it come out of your own mouth. And that's because dissonance is based on, if you argue a particular standpoint in a public forum and you do it on a voluntary basis, you surmise that you really must believe the perspective that you're arguing. And it doesn't happen if somebody else tells you that, oh, you shouldn't do drugs or you shouldn't pursue the thin beauty ideal. There's a whole bunch of programs that have tried that straight educational approach. So I think it's important to realize that the Body Project is successful because it reduces pursuit of the thin ideal by using persuasion.
And I want to jump in because, especially as I hear what you're saying, I want to make sure that everybody listening to this walks away understanding that, yes, we want everyone to know about the Body Project, about your research, about the thin ideal and why it's so toxic, but perhaps most important to know about cognitive dissonance, because we've had other guests on the podcast, and we're kind of getting towards the end of this interview where we'll ask you this $1 million question, but a lot of questions like, what do you want to tell parents? And I think that what you're saying about how, we really shouldn't be trying to talk our kids out of anything with all this knowledge we're getting, but rather plant seeds and almost introduce the idea of cognitive dissonance to them about whatever topic you might be talking about, whether it's the thin beauty ideal or drug use or what have you. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that because I'm hearing you say that this is critical, and really having a clear understanding of the research even backing up cognitive dissonance as a very effective way of changing behavior in a positive direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think they hear the message because they're arguing the perspective, and there's pros and cons of virtually everything, and so just giving people some space to talk about the costs of alcohol use or unprotected sexual behavior, it would totally talk people out of engaging in those risky behaviors. So I think it's a really cool strategy of kind of getting people to internalize it, but there's a lot of facets to dissonance induction. So it has to be voluntary. It has to be publicly accountable. So we put like a video camera in the room to make people feel more accountable for talking out against pursuing the thin beauty ideal. But what's really crazy is in a trial that we're just wrapping up this month, we compared the effects of the Body Project when implemented by other college students to college students, so peer educators, versus clinicians like the three of us. The peer educators significantly beat us out because kids listened to people that were exactly like them in a way that they didn't listen to professional clinicians. And I'm just blown away. I think that was about a 70% reduction in future eating disorder onset for peer-led Body Project groups compared to clinician-led Body Project groups. Could be 60%. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but it was totally crazy. Nobody's ever tested that idea, but it totally lines up with that dissonance perspective that if somebody just like you is telling you some message, you're much more likely to give them credibility than if somebody very different than you is conveying the same message.
So as a parent listening, I'm imagining some people are saying, okay, I want my teenager to do this or my kid to do this Body Project. How do I get them to do it? And I'm wondering how you'd answer that question.
That's if they're at one of the 150 to 200 universities that's implementing the Body Project, it's very possible that they could kind of go avail themselves of that. The groups that are offered there, like at the University of Texas, we've been offering Body Project groups forever, and there's a steady, nice demand from the community. But if I were a parent, I would probably encourage my school counselors to offer Body Project groups at the local high schools, at the local college. It's super easy to do. You can read the script, which is freely available to download on the internet, and anybody can implement this, including undergraduates who have no professional training. It's just really kind of crazy, but if we're going to solve this problem that affects, 13% of all young girls and about 3 or 4% of all young boys, we need to implement these programs on a broad basis. It's not going to really change the population prevalence of eating disorders or even body dissatisfaction unless we really implement these programs broadly.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say one of the reasons why I personally started this journey into the Full Bloom Project is because I heard you speak at an Academy for Eating Disorders keynote panel in San Francisco, I think it was, about this, about the Body Project. And I feel that parents need to figure out how to get this into their child, or to their kids. And I want people to know that there is a way to do that, which is to go online and we can supply that information, and to encourage their kids' counselors, school counselors, to run a highly evidence-based practice. There's a lot of other opportunities to do that, but this, from what I understand, really has the highest evidence base, or has been most research. I'm not sure how you would put that. I'd love to hear in your words how you say that, but that's my understanding. And I want my listeners to know, here's a gem just sitting here online, waiting for you to take it to your counselor and advocate for them to run these programs that really work.
Yeah. So from my perspective, the most exciting data that we've found is in several randomized trials, 3 conducted to date, we found statistically significant reductions in future onset of eating disorders. And that's the holy grail of an eating disorder prevention program, of a body acceptance intervention. So, in a 2008 paper, we found that people who completed the Body Project compared to just an assessment on a control condition showed a 60% reduction in future eating disorder onset over 3-year follow-up. We've replicated that finding in this ongoing study that we're just going to write up very soon, which has followed the kids out through 4-year follow-up, and it's the biggest trial today. And it's really important to put that in perspective because only one other eating disorder prevention program has done that, and that was actually the healthy weight intervention that we just spoke of. Those are the only 2 eating disorder prevention programs that have been shown to reduce blinded interviewer assessed onset of eating disorders over multi-year follow-up. So it's really exciting. NIH back in the mid-90s decreed that the first eating disorder prevention program was such an abysmal failure that they weren't going to fund any more research trying to conduct body image or eating disorder prevention programs. And luckily, we pushed forward with it and got some funding from the Hogg Foundation in Austin, Texas, that allowed us to really kind of take off with this, and it's been really good. But the other really exciting thing is that Ada Gerhardi, who's a professor in Sweden, conducted a project where they evaluated virtual body project groups. So conducted in Google Hangout on the internet totally. So these kids never actually interacted with a clinician or each other, but they did it all online. And really excitingly, they found a 73% reduction in future onset of eating disorders over a 2-year follow-up. So I was a consultant on that project and helped train them initially to do that. But the good news is, with 3 randomized trials showing that completing the body project reduces future eating disorder onset, we have a really great solution to a problem that we never thought we could solve. And I just want everybody to step back and think about it, because what this amounts to is we've essentially written a play that a random group of 9 or 10 people will get together in a group, and they'll have a conversation that we write out in the script. And that conversation reduces the odds that kid is going to show onset of an eating disorder is just phenomenal. Like 4 hours of an intervention to reduce a psychiatric disorder like that is much better than we ever expected. And, it's obviously critical because eating disorders have the highest mortality rate of any psychiatric condition, which is underappreciated, but this is a really exciting time to be kind of in this field.
And first of all, especially as you said it, it's phenomenal. And I'm imagining that young people that might even fall prey to subclinical eating disorders would be helped as well, that would be prevented as well, like a subclinical presentation.
That's included, yeah.
Yeah, that's included. So what I'm thinking is, yes, I want everybody listening to grab the script and read it, and maybe introduce some Socratic questioning at home using the material. But really, this is a call to action. This is like a call to everyone listening, parents, care providers, school counselors, to do some kind of like community organizing and almost make this a little bit more mainstream, whether it's getting a group going after school or at a camp or, any number of other kinds of clubs. It seems like the issue is not, there's no question around whether or not this is effective. Perhaps the question is about how do you effectively mobilize? And we've had other conversations about activism, and I feel like this is, I feel like it's a call to action.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should say that we actually did a paper with a German student, Sina Mueller, maybe back in 2011, and we took all of the trials that we conducted to date, put them all in one data set, and asked the question of whether people who came into the trial with a threshold or subthreshold eating disorder baseline, whether they showed equal benefit to kids who didn't have an eating disorder. And the answer was no, they showed a 4 times greater benefit. So in other words, the body project works 4 times better for people with eating disorders than without eating disorders. So it's really crazy that way, and it actually prompted us to develop the body project treatment, which is a dissonance-based treatment for eating disorders, which is an 8-session group intervention that in the best trials so far, we found a 55% abstinence rate after this 8-hour intervention. And it's insane because it costs 1/20th the cost of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is considered the treatment of choice today. So I think we're going all sorts of good places to come up with really short, easy to deliver interventions that will prevent eating disorders and also treat them.
It's exciting, and thank you for doing so much research. I really appreciate the research side of this, because I'm sure as you, as a researcher, see kind of so much. The good news is there's a lot of body positivity out there right now, much more than probably when you started. But I imagine through your research lens, some of it feels like all of your work, it's misguiding people a little bit. And all of your work has helped you guided you closer and closer to where you are right now and helped you refine. I don't know, how long have you been researching? 20 years, 30 years?
Yeah, it's about 20 years.
20 years, like we have this amazing refinement that you've gone through. And I want people to know, like, Eric's been doing this work, and for you parents and listeners to just take right now and do something with it. And I hope that we can help. And I also hope that that you'll keep us abreast, Eric, of what's coming out, so that if it's even easier for families and to access the Body Project, that we can let them know too. So, if the virtual thing ever happens here in the States, or how they can access that, we would love to keep our listeners informed so that they can just make this as easy as possible to get to their kids. Which maybe we could just wrap up with that $1 million question, which is, if each parent listening to this podcast took away and did one thing regularly, what would you recommend they do?
That's a great question. And I'll preface it by thanking you for getting the word out to folks about the important research that's emerging, because it really is vital to kind of share this information with lots of people. If I had to choose one thing, I'd actually encourage parents not to model body image obsessions and dieting and all that kind of stuff. I think one of the most harmful things is just having a parent who talks all the time about how much they need to diet tomorrow and lose weight and look better in a bikini or something like that. I think modeling is the start, but if I could say two things, I would include asking your kids Socratic questions about what are the costs of being obsessed about your appearance and trying to pursue this thin ideal. How does it make you feel in social media when you're comparing yourself to all your peers? That's a new toxic kind of form that it's in. But I would encourage parents to not model obsession about appearance and kind of strange dietary restriction. Instead, just eat healthy diet and exercise regularly, and then ask your kids to argue about the negative costs of pursuing the thin beauty ideal.
Yeah. And I think what we can do perhaps to help bridge the gap is maybe get some of those questions formulated just on our website, so that parents can know that, here are some questions that they are, pulled from the Body Project, and, this is an effective way to ask them. And Dr. Eric Stice says you should be asking these questions. It's one of the best things you can do.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time and all your research, all the hours that you've worked on pulling together the information that you've been able to share with us and our listeners today. We really appreciate it, and we thank you so much.
You're welcome. It was great to talk with you.
So, Leslie, you mentioned that you were inspired by hearing Eric talk at a conference. That was at AED in San Francisco. I know you actually started running your own Body Project groups after that. And I'm curious, what was your experience running them? What was that like?
I loved that there's so much research behind it. I felt really good about delivering the content to the individuals, to the group members. I think that the question really for me is, how do we get this program to people? And how do our listeners do something with this?
Yeah. I was just reflecting on how I grew up in New York City, and I think was growing up in a time when this program was in existence, and I had never heard about it. Not in any independent school or public school, any friends. I don't know anybody that was in this program. And even becoming an eating disorder therapist, I didn't know about this program. In fact, I learned about this program through you, when you told me about the content and that you were experimenting with offering it in your practice. And I think that reflecting, talking to Eric and understanding what an incredible impact this material can have. And I mean, he is literally saying the results are even better if a peer leads the group. So we could get these groups going in our practices, but that's not the point. The point is really to advocate for getting these groups in your community and having them be in some ways peer-led. And so I guess I'm hoping maybe we can all, listeners too, like think together about what would it take to get the word out that these programs work, that they're accessible, they're free online, we're putting it up on our website, and it just requires some action. And I guess I'm finding myself curious, like what's going on here, that there's this really wonderful intervention that has the potential to really be incredibly protective, and yet very few people know about it and very few people are doing it. So I'm both venting about that and pondering that, and then just, I guess, asking you and everyone listening, what are we going to do about this?
Yeah, I mean, as a parent myself, I could and should and want to go to my kids' school and talk to the administration about it, present it as an option, present the research, and see what happens. And I feel like that's a lot of action on my part. It is. Yeah. And I think it's a big ask of all parents that are listening. But I feel so strongly about this resource that I think it's one of those big call to actions that I kind of want to make. After talking with Dr. Stice, I'm reminded the Body Project is why I started the Full Bloom Project. And I want people to have access to this, more people. And I hope that some of our listeners go for it. Go for it. And I think one of the things as a practitioner that I've found challenge running this project is that it's hard to get kids to do anything after school. I mean, there's so many things that they're doing after school that we want them to be doing. We know that this 4-session program is highly impactful for many, many kids, for every kid, or 6 out of 10 kids, 7 out of 10 kids. So I think the best place to do that is where they already are, in school or in some type in their sports teams. Like, it's possible, but I don't think that kids want to go into a therapist's office, and parents don't want to send their kids into a therapist's office for something like this. I think it's better to be woven into something that they're doing. And you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, parents. If you want us to run virtual body project groups, let us know. But I think that's one of the challenges.
Yeah. And I think, too, from previous conversation we had with Eric, this sort of the secret sauce of the Body Project, yes, it's the content, but it's also the delivery. It's having, in the case of young people talk each other out, talk themselves out of this idea. And it's not the same if like a health teacher is lecturing about this, even though the content is still useful in the same way that he's saying, like as parents, we can take the scripts. And I think that I would like to kind of repurpose those for, typical conversation in my household as my kids get older, but really being able to think creatively, and we're going to keep thinking creatively too. I think we want to innovate in this sort of how do we figure out a way to mobilize young people to find each other and have this conversation as opposed to a more toxic conversation. And
that only 4 of these conversations,
right,
when specific topics are talked about in a certain way, are enough. Only 4 of these conversations. It's mind-blowing to me. It's exciting to me, but it's also a challenge. And so I think maybe that's a good place to wrap up.
Yes, I think so too. And hope this episode has inspired all of you to think critically about that thin ideal and how you can help your kids really discover for themselves the value of rejecting it instead of internalizing it.
And as always, we're interested in your take on today's episode and what new parenting practice our guest inspired in you. So do get in touch with us on Instagram at Full Bloom Project. And if you like what you're hearing, please consider leaving us a comment or rating on iTunes so more people can learn about the Full Bloom podcast.
And tune back in next time for more body positive parenting wisdom.